All right, good afternoon, everyone. Welcome. My name is Tony Mancini, and welcome to the Environment and Sustainability Standing Committee. It's April the 3rd, and it's 1 o'clock. So let's begin. First of all, I'd like to acknowledge that the land that we are is the land of the Mi'kmaq people, and here in Mi'kma'ki, we consider ourselves all to be treaty people. We're looking to need approval of minutes from March the 6th. We have a seconder for that, Councillor Hartling. All in favor? We now have official minutes. Next is approval of the orders of business and approval of additions and deletions. Madam Clerk, are there any additions?
No additions or deletions have been received by the clerk's office.
Thank you. Anything from committee members? Seeing nothing from committee members, we have someone to move. Thank you, Kathy Daigle-Gammon, a seconder. And Councillor Steele. All those in favor? We now have an official agenda. Business arising out of the minutes. Seeing none. Call for declaration of conflict of interest. Nobody shares in oil or fracking or anything. No, so we're good. Number 6, 7, 8, 9, motions of reconsideration, motions of rescissions, consideration of deferred business, notice of table matters, all none. Next is 10.1 correspondence. Madam Clerk, are there any correspondence?
Yes, we received correspondence for item 10.3.1, which has been circulated to the members of the committee.
Good, thank you very much. Next is 10.2 petitions. Any petitions, committee members or Madam Clerk?
No petitions have been received by the clerk's office, Chair.
Thank you. Nothing from the committee. Seeing no petitions. So today is we have actually 3 presentations plus public participation, which makes up the bulk of our meeting today. And first, if our first presenters would mind coming forward, 10.3.1, Dr. Catherine Brown and Dr. Jennifer McClellan, why public health and partners recommend community water fluoridation. Before they start, and I'll get them to introduce their background, I'm going to ask Councillor Kathy Daigle-Gammon, who's also the Vice Chair of Halifax Water, to speak. We had Halifax Water, Kendra McKenzie, speak to us at the last committee meeting, talking about what's happening, what has happened, and where they're going. They've now made some decisions, so I wonder if Councillor, if you would mind sharing those decisions with us. That would be fantastic.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. So yes, as Chair Mancini, our Deputy Mayor, has said, also Vice Chair of the Halifax Water Commission. And on March 27th, 2025, at our last Commissioners Board of Directors meeting, the following motion was approved. And that was 1, to continue fluoridating at the J.D. Klein Water Supply Plant and the Lake Major Water Supply Plant. To proceed with option 2, which is to reinstate fluoride at the Lake Major at approximately a cost of $1 million within 2 years, and staff are currently scoping that out right now. 3, to establish notification protocols for interruptions of fluoridation in consultation with the medical officer of health and dental partners, and that will be ongoing. And 4, is to write a letter to the province of Nova Scotia requesting funding assistance for both capital and operating costs associated with fluoridation, where it's been shown that community water fluoridation reduced costs to the healthcare system. So that letter is in process right now. That will be going to the Premier. And we have another meeting that's set up in April where we'll be doing a follow-up on what those responses might be from the province. And so I am very happy to say about the collaboration that we have with Dr. Catherine Brown and with Dr. Jennifer McClellan, and I'm very interested to hear what they're going to say in our Q&A. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Councillor. Personally, I think that's great news that we're pointing in the right direction, and so today's presentation is quite timely based on that. So thanks to your colleagues back at Halifax Water. Kendra McKenzie's leadership is, once again, it's a big thumbs up for what the work that she does. And this was a tough topic, and so I appreciate that work too. Can you make sure that motion gets shared with everyone, maybe with the clerk's office, so that we could share?
Certainly. The motion will be ratified at the next board meeting in terms of the approval of the minutes. So, but it's public and open to be shared.
Okay.
Thanks.
Thank you so much. Fantastic. So to our presenters, introduce yourself and your role, and we're happy to have both of you here today. Welcome.
Thank you so much. And it really is a pleasure to speak with the Halifax Regional Council Environmental and Sustainability Standing Committee. And today we're really here to speak on the importance of continued water fluoridation in our community. And of course, we're really delighted to hear the news that Vice Chair and Councillor Kathy Deagle-Gammon has just provided. So my name's Dr. Catherine Brown, and I'm the Regional Medical Officer of Health for Central Zone Nova Scotia, which of course includes Halifax. And co-presenting with me today, right behind me, is Dr. Jennifer McClellan. She's the past president of the Nova Scotia Dental Association and a pediatric dentist at the IWK. So our presentation is 20 minutes, and we'll be pleased to take questions at the end. Our purpose today is to highlight the benefits of water fluoridation in Halifax and to increase knowledge on the impacts and costs of ceasing water fluoridation. To start off, we wanted to share a strong recommendation to continue use of fluoride in Pockwalk Lake and Lake Major water supply plants to prevent tooth decay and promote oral health among Haligonians. And we really hope the remainder of today's presentation will help you understand both the rationale and the strength behind our recommendation. We were really delighted to learn that at their meeting on March 27th, the Halifax Water Board of Commissioners unanimously endorsed continuing to fluoridate at Pockwalk and Lake Major water supply plants and to reinstate fluoride at Lake Major within 2 years. So thank you very much to the leadership of Halifax Water Board on that. Many governments, associations, and professional organizations have endorsed community water fluoridation. And today we wanted to highlight the strong support for fluoridation here in Nova Scotia. So today we'll be discussing 5 key rationales on why we strongly recommend water fluoridation. First, it's our best preventive tool against tooth decay in our community. Second, it's equitable. It improves oral health for everyone, regardless of age, income, or access to dental care services and supplies. Third, it's tightly regulated and monitored to ensure optimal fluoride levels are always maintained. Fourth, it's safe, with decades of research supporting safety here in Canada and around the world. And finally, it's cost-effective, with every dollar spent on fluoridation saving society several dollars. And so I'll now hand it over to Dr. McClellan to speak more about why fluoride is important for oral health, why dental decay matters, and how we can prevent it in Nova Scotia and in Halifax.
Thank you, Catherine. Am I on? Yes. Thank you so much for having us here today. And Catherine has been a huge advocate in supporting our profession to have community water fluoridation reinstated. So I'm going to speak a little bit to what I see in my world as a pediatric dentist and as a dentist to show the impact that not having fluoride available to our citizens can lead to. So I think we all know fluoride is a natural mineral that's found in water, soil, plants, and food. And it's also a material that's added to many of our dental products because we know with research that it's very, very effective. I don't think there's any studies that show the ineffectiveness of fluoride. There's studies that have concerns on different levels, but we do know that it truly does make a difference. Fluoride works in 2 different ways. One is systemically. So as we're young and we're drinking water and having fluoridated products during the time of tooth development, it's actually incorporated into the tooth and makes the tooth stronger for life. Then there's a topical effect. So when we drink water or we brush our teeth and we have the fluoride on our teeth, it's constantly preventing decay and preventing the progression of decay. So One study that I think is impactful states adult oral health is predicted not only by child socioeconomic advantage or disadvantage, but also by oral health in childhood. So if we can establish good health when we're young, that can carry us through life. Fluoride reduces dental decay in children, youth, adults, and seniors. It's not just something for children. And it's especially important as we age and we tend to have more of our root surfaces and things showing. We see that 1 in 5 seniors age 65 and older have untreated tooth decay. Everyone is susceptible to dental disease. Every single one of us, regardless of where we stand in society. However, it's disproportionately a disease of poverty, minority, and social disadvantage. So we can see unmet dental needs in about 47% of people living in lower income and 26 of those living in higher income situations. So these numbers are important. It's not 100% of low income and 0% of high income. We can all benefit from fluoride. Oral health is an essential component of overall health, and this has really been taken up over the last 20, 30 years, realizing that if we don't have a healthy oral cavity, it can actually affect us systemically, our bodies. And we see this in children, especially when they're living with chronic or acute dental pain. They stop growing. Not only weight, but they actually are smaller. And when we can treat their dental disease, they quickly come back into the growth curves that put them in a good place in their lives. So this chronic and acute pain that's associated with dental disease has effects both on physical and psychological health. So as children get older and they're interacting with their peers or adults who have untreated dental disease and they're socializing, trying to find employment, these things can have a real impact on them. The Canadian Incidence Study, which shows the state of oral health in Canada, is a wonderful study with lots and lots of statistics. So this was a national study which showed that over 2 million school days per year were lost for dental visits or dental sick days. So that's for children, and over 4 million working days lost per year for adults for dental visits, dental sick days, or taking care of their children who are home from school on those days. Lower oral health related quality of life and dental disease is more strongly associated in lower income families, but again, it affects everyone. And those children who are at school and experiencing pain don't have the capacity to be learning and concentrating, so it can certainly affect their education. So not to scare everyone, but I can't do this presentation without showing the huge impact of dental disease. These may seem extreme and a picture that many of us in the room may never have seen before. This is my day-to-day. So these are children living in chronic and acute pain. The photos on the flanks of the slide are children, and those in the center are adults, showing that we can have the same impact in adulthood. So to speak a little bit about IWK Health, where we were talking about reducing the cost and the burden to our provincially funded programs, these are statistics for us, the pediatric dentists that work at IWK Health in the operating room. Dental procedures are the most common reason for preschool children to require general anesthetic. The most common reason. Early childhood caries, which is the term we give to caries in childhood or decay in childhood, is the most chronic infectious disease of childhood. Over 30% of pediatric day surgical time in Canada is consumed by treating this disease, and this stands at IWK. We have more day surgical time at the hospital than any other service that's there. We receive an exorbitant number of referrals per year. We cannot keep up with, even though we have that over our time, which we're very grateful for, We cannot keep up with it. So unfortunately, at any point in time, we can have over 1,000 children waiting for care. So that leads them to long wait times, more pain, more time missed from school. This is just a snapshot from the fall of last year, but these numbers stand. More children and youth who we treat are waiting over a year to have their dental treatment needs met than any other service, which is heartbreaking. Sorry, I get a little choked up. So one just quick story. This is one of many, and it just kind of resonates with the fact that we had lost the community water fluoride for a length of time. We had an 8-year-old who was living in the Lake Major water supply area who was referred to us. We saw them for a consultation. They waited 6 months to get treatment completed and ended up actually having to lose permanent teeth, not just baby teeth, but permanent teeth. So water fluoridation isn't the only thing that contributes to this, but there's a thought that it certainly could have slowed down the progression of that disease. So is it preventable? We hear, oh, you have cavities, it's preventable if you just do these things. Yes, there are protective measures, good oral health, brushing with a fluoridated toothpaste, healthy food choices that are less likely to cause decay, seeing an oral health professional regularly, applying fluoride at your dental visits, and drinking fluoridated water. I'd argue that the first 4 bullet points are not accessible to everyone. If you have a choice to put food on the table or buy toothpaste, you're probably going to put food on the table. So food choices, food security. Not everyone has access to the things that we may recommend. We see lots of patients with, or persons with special health care needs with very limited diets, difficult to perform oral hygiene, difficult to find a dentist who's comfortable to treat people with medical conditions. So fluoridated drinking water is equitable for all. It's something that can be accessed when these other things are barriers that cannot be surpassed. So we know that drinking fluoridated water strengthens the teeth, reduces cavities by about 25% in both children and adults. And even those with financial and other barriers to care can benefit from community water fluoridation. Back to Catherine.
Thanks so much, Jennifer. So, one of the goals of public health and health system as a whole is to create health equity, where individuals in our community have a fair opportunity to reach their full health potential. And as Dr. McClellan mentioned, although we've seen reductions in how often and how severe tooth decay occurs over the past decades for all the other preventable reasons she discussed, these reductions have not been experienced the same across all communities and groups. There are still gaps. And so water fluoridation is that impactful tool because it is universal and accessible. And I think Dr. McClellan really said it best. It reaches everyone in our community, regardless of their age, their income, or access to dental care. I recognize many on the standing committee have more familiarity than us on who lives in the community serviced by Lake Major, but I thought it important to highlight some characteristics. The Lake Major service area captures approximately 1/4 of all people living in HRM. Of particular note is 2 prominent historic African Nova Scotian communities, North Preston and Cherrybrook. Many of the communities served by Lake Major Water Supply Plant face important and overlapping challenges, including higher levels of poverty, racism, discrimination, and food insecurity. They are communities with lower access to dental care or dental products, and it's for this very reason that these communities are likely to experience the greatest benefit from water fluoridation. The guidelines for Canadian drinking water quality are designed to regulate and decrease potential health hazards that can be found in drinking water. Fluoride is a unique chemical in that at high levels, it's a health hazard, while at low levels, it has key benefits for improving oral health. Across Nova Scotia, drinking water is tested daily to ensure that optimal fluoride levels are always maintained. Health Canada has set the optimal level of fluoride in drinking water at 0.7 milligrams per liter, and this is less than half the maximal acceptable concentration of 1.5 milligrams per liter. And the reason this was set in drinking water is to account for exposure to fluoride from all those other common sources, such as toothpaste and access to dental treatments. So let me start by acknowledging that as with any chemical, it's really the dose that makes the poison. Fluoride can be harmful when a person has long-standing exposure to fluoride at levels much higher than Canada's regulated maximum. And that's the reason why we tightly regulate and monitor the concentrations of fluoride in our drinking water. Decades of extensive research has shown fluoridated drinking water is safe when optimal fluoride concentrations are maintained. And as you've just heard from Dr. McClellan, fluoridated water is not just safe, but beneficial to oral health. And this has been shown for over 75 years. So what are some of the risks associated with fluoride? I think it's really important that we're aware of these so we can understand how we can reduce them and how concerned we should be. The main risks of fluoride are dental fluorosis and skeletal fluorosis. Mild dental fluorosis is a purely cosmetic issue. It's not associated with any health or oral health concerns. You are only at risk at developing more severe forms of dental fluorosis with repeated exposure to high concentrations of fluoride. And because fluoride is kept at safe concentrations in Canada, this is very rare. Skeletal fluorosis results in bone and joint hardening that makes people more susceptible to fractures. It occurs with ingesting levels of fluoride nearly 10 times the maximal acceptable level in Canada. And so this, as you'd imagine, is extremely rare in Canada. We almost only ever see it in newcomer populations who would have had higher levels of fluoride exposure in their home country. And really, my takeaway here is the benefits of water fluoridation at the optimal levels far outweigh the potential risks of fluorosis. As you may have heard, there is a potential but uncertain association between high fluoride exposure, above what's allowed in Nova Scotia, and lowered IQ in children. And again, I really want to emphasize, it's the dose that makes the poison. The evidence here is mixed, with some studies showing an association and other studies showing no association. And there are real concerns about the methodologies in these studies. Regardless, my takeaway is at the optimal levels, the evidence does not support a link. Lastly, Health Canada commissioned a systematic review. This is a summary of existing research on fluoride and different health endpoints. Health Canada looked at 30 other potential health risks other than fluorosis and neurocognition, things like cancer, fracture, heart attacks, obesity, and more. And again, the evidence here showed no link between these other adverse health effects and water fluoridated at optimal levels. Water fluoridation is cost-effective. Dental services, as we all know, are expensive. And by preventing a sizable portion of dental decay, water fluoridation yields a high return on investment. Right now, Halifax Water reports the operational cost for water fluoridation is 30 to 40 cents per customer annually. And every $1 invested in water fluoridation is estimated to save between $5 and $93 per person in dental services. So I wanted to end by sharing the cautionary tale of fluoride cessation in the city of Calgary. Calgary ceased water fluoridation in 2011 after the previous fluoride infrastructure reached the end of its life cycle and was decommissioned and removed. After discontinuing it in 2011, multiple research studies have shown that the rates of dental caries soared in Calgary. And this was particularly seen in low-income children. In late 2021, Calgary City Council voted to have fluoride reintroduced to drinking water. Commissioning of newly installed equipment at Calgary's 2 water treatment plants is currently underway, and fluoridation is expected to be in place by the end of June 2025. And so we hope following this presentation, you have a better understanding why public health and dental partners to continue to recommend water fluoridation in Halifax. This is such an important and valuable service Halifax Water is currently providing our community, and we're really so pleased and delighted by the good news Councillor Kathy Deagle-Gammon shared before the meeting about Halifax Water's intent to continue this service. So thank you again for speaking with us, and we'd be delighted to take any comments or questions you have.
Well, Dr. Brown, Dr. McClellan, thank you very much both for that presentation. You know, Dr. Brown, you should, or rather Dr. McClellan, you should not apologize for your motion. I think it's pretty good that any leaders to show emotion, they care so much about something, so never apologize for that. So let's see, we've got some questions from the committee. First up, Councillor Deagle-Gammon, you have the floor, ma'am.
Thank you very much, Deputy Mayor and Chair. Catherine and Jennifer, thank you so much for being here and for giving the information. We're pleased that the position that Halifax Water has taken, but it's been a journey to get here as well, right? So there's been a lot of things going on. One of the things in the slide was that in Nova Scotia, how many plants actually in Nova Scotia, how many water utilities in Nova Scotia put fluoride in the water? How many?
Yeah, I can speak to that.
Just your mic for a second, sorry.
Thank you. Just need a bit of coaching on the tech here. I can certainly speak to that. So Public Health, working with Nova Scotia Environment, is aware of about 10 or 11 different water supply plants across the province who do fluoridate. So there's a number up in Cape Breton, around Sydney, a number up in Northern Zone, and then of course in Halifax being the largest population.
Great. And so, and because we've worked together in terms of that, it says that, of the preventable things that, fluoridated water is not available to everyone, but fluoridated water is not available to everyone either in the province, right? And so even within HRM, those 2 plants do not serve the entire population of HRM. So we have a lot of people on wells, we have a lot of people on small water systems. Even Halifax Water has some small plants that we don't. And, fluoride isn't a mandated, we wish it was. We wish it was mandated, right? But it's not. So, and where the utility is a cost recovery program, although the ongoing costs are, as you cited, the capital costs are much larger when you think about what it costs for the capital side of the fluoride. So, and we know the benefits of it, and we know that the benefit happens within our health system. So I guess I'm wondering, where is the province in this conversation, and where do you get to advocate with the province? Because the Department of Health is the agency that benefits the most after our youth, after our children, right, have that kind of stuff. So I guess I'm wondering, what can we do? I mean, Halifax Water is going to lead. We're going to write a letter to the Premier and all that kind of stuff. But what else can we do to advocate so that the province mandates this as something and then actually helps to fund so that all water utilities can provide the fluoride in the water? Thanks. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Of course, I would like to see water fluoridation across the province. I grew up in Truro, and I practiced in Truro as a general dentist for many years, and I will say, many different socioeconomic strata there, but the majority of the children that I treated, no matter what, had caries due to that. So I think maybe one thing I know we've been looking at, and there's research money and things with the Canadian Dental Care Plan that's supposed to address gaps, is to start to do some research that is able to compare the non-fluoridated communities and the fluoridated communities, similar to what they did in Calgary and Edmonton. We didn't really have the opportunity to do it in a prospective way this time because we didn't know that the water had been removed. But I think if we could show through studies that benefit, and also mentioning we're very lucky in this province to have provincially funded dental programs for children and patients with special healthcare needs. So it is a saving to those programs if we have fluoride in the drinking water.
And I think I would absolutely agree. We would love to see water fluoridation expanded to all municipalities across Nova Scotia. My understanding in Nova Scotia, about half of Nova Scotians currently benefit from fluoridated water. It's about 40% of Nova Scotians who are on well water. So they wouldn't necessarily be able to benefit, but that leaves about a gap of 10% of Nova Scotians, including many, as you mentioned, in HRM who aren't necessarily on municipal water. And so I think that's a really important conversation that needs to be had. The one thing I did want to add is we do see what's called a halo effect. So even if a Haligonian or a Nova Scotian isn't on fluoridated water, they may play, work, learn, go to school in a part of the province which is fluoridated. And so they'll actually get those benefits from having exposure to those water supplies, be it visits with grandparents or drinking the tap water at school. Just a note on your last question. I think this is something public health really feels strongly about, the importance and the benefits for Nova Scotians. And I know Dr. Strang also is a really strong advocate for community water fluoridation. The recent conversations that have happened both here in Halifax, but also New Glasgow, have really elevated this issue. And so he's brought together a leadership team that's now looking more closely at water fluoridation. And my understanding is upcoming this spring, he'll be doing engagement with all the communities across Nova Scotia who currently fluoride to better understand what's working well and what are some of the challenges and what might be needed as part of those provincial conversation. So I think from a public health perspective, please expect more to come. We're hoping to keep this on the radar.
Good, thank you, Councillor. Councillor Hartling, you have the floor.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair, and thank you to you both for coming. I really appreciate the presentation and your time. So as I understand it, we're talking about fluoride today because the fluoride system went offline at one of the water plants, and unfortunately they didn't have a schedule or a timetable to alert the public about when that had happened, and so that's how it got to the place that it was. I'm wondering, have you started that dialogue with Halifax Water yet in terms of what timeline you would like to see notification out to the public in the event that that fluoridation has gone offline? That would be my first question. And you can say I don't know, or no, that hasn't happened yet. That's totally fine. I'm just kind of following up. Pardon me? Oh yeah, okay. And then
So just to add to that, yes, absolutely. And I think Halifax Water recognizes that
Right.
there needs to be a better plan for communication moving forward.
Right.
So they've been engaging public health over the last few months to
Right.
talk about what does that look like for different stakeholders. And so you can see in the recent Halifax report, one of the suggestions that have been put forward is a 90-day period.
a 90-day.
And that's what's used in Ontario as an example.
And I'm also wondering, like I grew up with fluoridation mouthwashes in schools and things like that. I'm wondering, are you also exploring any ways to deliver fluoride to, folks in the municipality, given that we might be a couple years away?
That's a great question. And I think it's one we've been thinking a lot about. I think, first of all, it's really important that our communities in Halifax are aware of this gap so that they can have those individual conversations with their dentists. But Dorothy, if you don't mind just sharing the screen, I did want to share a slide I just prepared in reserve to talk about the public health school-based fluoride program.
Yeah.
And so we've been offering topical fluoride since 1998. It used to be that rinse that you
Yeah.
probably remember. But what we've actually moved towards is topical fluoride varnish, which is a better way of delivering fluoride. And we're now doing that, targeting children and communities that benefit from that additional layer of protection. We have different criteria. One of the biggest criteria we look at is if you're in a lower neighborhood income community, we go in. But another criteria is what is your access to community water fluoridation?
Okay, so I know that, so for example, I live on a well, and I know that when my kids go to the dentist, I believe they get that painted on.
Yeah.
And so that's what you're looking to move into the schools as well?
That's
you
what we're already
have it-
doing.
You already do that?
Yeah, we're in 19 schools across Halifax right now.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor White, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor. My question, I don't know if you get into this, but just is bottled water fluorinated or not?
It's not fluoridated. I know in other countries there's bottled drinking water is called floor water or something, but I'm not aware of any bottled water that's fluoridated. So I know we could have a lot of parents, they won't drink tap water and they'll only drink bottled water. And I say, well, fill it up after they go to bed, put it in the fridge, and they're not going to know the difference.
Yeah, I think that's important for people to know when you're making choices. So thank you for clarifying that.
Thank you, Councillor. Any other questions from the committee? Seeing none, I have some questions, some comments, if I may, from the chair. I'm really glad that you shared the Calgary experience. I think for those of us who have heard from our residents over the years about the challenges, and you alluded to that in your presentation also, having Calgary go through this experience of not having fluoridation and now realizing that the right decision is put it back in the water, I think that was very important to share that experience. Dr. McClellan, one of your slides hit home for me was sometimes the choice for some of our residents is food over toothpaste. I mean, I think most of us in this room, that doesn't even come into our thought process. But once again, we do have to be reminded of our residents, and there's a range. And so that really hit home for me. And really addressing those disadvantages of not having fluoride in the water, I think was very, very helpful, along with the Calgary experience. The long waiting patient list that you talked about, the IWK, is very concerning. The pictures of the children's and dental disease, very, very concerning. So thank you for the presentation. Since I have both of you here, I'm going to stretch it a little bit, maybe go beyond today's conversation a little bit, and I would like to get your opinion. We talk about homelessness in all of our cities across this great country, and here in HRM, we've gotten homeless at a level that we've not seen in ever before. And we talked about health and the importance of dental health, but I think about those folks, or those residents of ours that are living under a bridge, living in a tent, maybe even living in a provincial shelter, that, is there any conversation that's happening with either of your organizations about how do we address this? We find that everybody, but many people that are homeless, not all, but many are, there's mental health issues, there's addiction issues, there are other issues why they're there too. But if someone's trying to get better, what are their chances of success of getting better if they're living in a tent? So how does someone get health? So from a health perspective, from a dental perspective, I know there's a stretch from our conversation today, but we have you here, and I really like your input to that.
Dental perspective, it's a huge issue, and what I was speaking of with a mouth that you can tell that someone has cavities and hasn't kept, that can impact getting a job and going on an interview, to kind of try to move out of that life course that they're in at that point in time. The Canadian Dental Care Program is something that's helping to address that. I have some concerns in that you need to file taxes to do that. So we're going to have people that are not filing taxes if they're not getting any benefits and things from the country. But I think that takes care of things to some degree. We do have our special needs programs, which are important, and that extends into adulthood. And one thing that we're looking at the Dental Association level and realizing that it's a truly vulnerable population that people don't necessarily think of in terms of oral health are those living in long-term care facilities and the ability to get to a dentist. So ideally, and with some of the funding for the research to look at gaps, it would be nice if we could develop some type of program between the Dental Association and the Dental Hygiene Association to have people go into those facilities to at least do a screening and decide, do we need to find a way to accessibly get them to a dentist to access care?
Maybe just to add from a public health perspective, I think we recognize that secure housing is one of the critical determinants of health, that access to income, access to education, social supports, all those things really impact your health more than, as a collective, more than perhaps just merely access to health services. And so I think if you're experiencing homelessness, where things like, do I have a roof over my head? Where's my next meal coming from? Do I have a place to stay warm, or do I have a place to stay dry? Your last worry really is looking after your oral health or your mental health or your physical health. It just doesn't even make that priority list. And so I think that's why it becomes even more important to try to create communities and systems where we're able to prevent disease in the first place, to really support an environment that promotes those healthy communities. And so, as Dr. McClellan mentioned, there are some programs that do provide some dental coverage for low-income individuals, and many individuals who are experiencing homelessness might not even be able to get access to those because they haven't been able to file their taxes. So it's really difficult. I think it speaks to the importance of having wraparound supports for people experiencing homelessness. And I think that things that we can do, like water fluoridation, that they don't even need to worry about, they can just benefit from, are so important.
Well, thank you both for that, and thank you, colleagues, for allowing me to stretch our conversation. I appreciate the presentation today. We all do. I'm hoping that we've developed somewhat of a relationship, because there may be further conversation we're having, not only on this topic, but on that topic of homelessness. That will be helpful. Thank you both very, very much. Appreciate it.
Pleasure. Thank you so much for inviting us to join you today.
Okay.
That's fantastic. So we're now moving on to our next presentation, which is 10.3.2. Karen McKendry wants to speak about conservation in Sandy Lake Sackville River Regional Park. We'll give her a few minutes to set up, and then we'll move on to the next group. Yeah. Hi, Karen. How are you? Good to see you. Welcome. We'll give the floor to you. You have 10 minutes, and we look forward to the conversation. Thank you so much.
Well, first, thank you so much for the committee hearing from me today. My name, if you haven't met me before, is Karen McKendry. My pronouns are she, her. I work with Ecology Action Center, and Ecology Action Center is just one of the 30 groups that belong to the Sandy Lake Sackville River Regional Park Coalition. So today I'll just briefly give a bit of an overview of the park in the area if you're not familiar with it, but then focus on what the coalition has been doing and some important decisions that are going to be made in the future that you might be connected to. So just to orient you geographically, if you're not familiar with the area, so here's a map. In lime green, light green, it shows Sandy Lake Regional Park. So that's an HRM park, a little over 1,000 acres that belongs to HRM. It's bounded on the east side, on the right side of this map, by Highway 102 when you're heading out to the airport. And on the south side, also shown in a yellow line, is Hammonds Plains Road. The yellow line shows the area that the coalition is advocating that the park should be expanded to. So amazingly, there is still a band of about 1,000 acres of wilderness that wraps around the park that's not owned by HRM and is not protected, but it's still wild and has lots of really interesting features. You can see Sandy Lake about in the middle, and it connects actually up to the Sackville River. So it connects hydrologically. There's streams and lakes that run over from Sandy Lake over to the Sackville River. And on the west side of the lake, in the area outlined in red, is an area that's proposed for housing development, which I'll speak to more later in the presentation. So that's the area that we're talking about. So just a couple of the neat features of Sandy Lake. It's exceptional from a recreational point of view. So wonderfully, HRM has a parking lot there, a supervised beach with lifeguards and a sandy beach, and people can take swimming lessons there in the summer. And it's really fantastic. It has trails through the area, so people can go on nature hikes, and classrooms can come there and learn. I will say it's also becoming an even more important piece of city infrastructure, because this is somewhere you can go and cool off and swim for free in the summer, which is becoming more and more important as our city gets warmer. Another exceptional feature of the area is it's exceptionally high in biodiversity, even compared to lots of other places in Nova Scotia. These are 15 species at risk, so endangered and threatened species, that amazingly still find habitat there because it's a large wild area. I've highlighted one in red, which is Atlantic salmon, which extraordinarily swims through Halifax Harbor, up the Sackville River, hangs a left, and comes up into Sandy Lake. And that's in big part because of the habitat restoration work done by the Sackville Rivers Association. So it's a very ecologically intact large area. Another amazing aspect of our biodiversity that's still there is the area still hosts old growth forests. So these are forests that are more than 140 years old that count in Nova Scotia as old growth. And there's thought to be maybe less than 1% of our forests in Nova Scotia are at this life stage, but you still find old growth forests in Sandy Lake Regional Park and in the land around it. And Sandy Lake is part of the Sandy Lake sub-watershed, which is one of the sub-watersheds of the Sackville River. And the Sackville River is the largest river that comes into Halifax Harbor. And as you know, as you learn about watersheds, what you do with the land in the watershed very much affects how quickly water moves through the watershed. So the more you clear land in a watershed for agriculture or through forestry or through paving and housing, the quicker the water moves through the watershed into its main river. So what happens in the Sandy Lake area definitely affects the risk of flooding downstream in the Sackville River. One more neat thing, and this is a very busy map, so you don't need to understand it, but the Halifax Green Network Plan, one aspect of that plan was computer modeling about how wildlife moved through our city. And as part of that, it showed where are the wildlife corridors, areas that are still intact enough that wildlife can move through a city, which we want, right? Because they provide important ecosystem services that keep our city running. 3 of those vital corridors run through the Sandy Lake Sackville River area because it's so big and still intact. And that's a bottleneck for the Halifax, like the Chebucto Peninsula. So it's a rich, rich area for wildlife movement if we keep it intact. That's why 30 groups have banded together over the last 6 years, all sorts of different community groups, different sizes, different missions, but united under one goal, which is we want to see Sandy Lake Regional Park expanded to that wild band around it, and do not want to see development on the west side of Sandy Lake, which is especially sensitive. So this is the goal of the coalition, which we've been advocating for and gathering people under this banner. The 2,800 comes from the park itself, which is a little over 1,000 acres, which would be threatened if development happens too close to it or in the wrong way. And then that additional band of still wild area around the park and the lakes. So the main threat to the integrity of the area and all of those assets I just described is a housing development proposed on the west side of the lake, which is not part of the park. The housing development is proposed by Clayton Developments, which is part of the Shaw Group of companies. And what was proposed through the regional plan process is 8,000 to 10,000 housing units in this area. So that is the size of the town of New Glasgow. So it's the size of a town, is the scale of what's proposed there right now. And what's really exceptional and unfortunate about where it's proposed is it's in the headwaters of the lake. The 3 of the 4 major streams that feed the lake are right where the roads and houses and infrastructure is proposed to be. Also in that area are the other features I described to you: exceptionally high biodiversity, including legally listed species at risk. Old growth forests are also in that area, and that's one of those last remaining wildlife corridors through the city is there as well. I will say the form of development that's proposed is also not in line with where the draft regional plan is calling that we go as a city. This is an area that's unserviced and it has not been prioritized for transit, and the form is suburban sprawl, so it's an unserviced area. It would also feed on to Hammonds Plains Road, which I probably don't have to tell some of the councillors here is a nightmare for traffic currently, and would maybe be made worse with 8,000 to 10,000 more cars. So an exceptionally sensitive area, and what's proposed is incompatible with keeping those values in place. I'll just say, you know, I am very aware, and many of the groups involved in the coalition are aware that the need for housing has drastically outstripped what was originally proposed, and we absolutely need a lot more housing, especially affordable housing. But there are other characteristics we have to keep in the city too to keep it functioning. So there's a lot of development proposed in this area. It is already closing in from all sides, even without the additional development there. But the groups that are united in the coalition believe that this is part of our city too. Wildlife deserves to live here too. We need these places with the recreational infrastructure to spend time in nature to get away from the heat. So it is compatible with our vision for the city, and some decisions about that are going to be coming up. So this area is being looked at through HRM's work under the Future Service Communities. There's 4 areas being looked at right now. They have had background studies go out to a consultant where they look at all kinds of things, including about the environment, where are the streams and where are the old growth forests and that kind of stuff. It's my understanding that those consultant reports are done and are with HRM staff now. They haven't been made public, so I haven't seen them. And my understanding is that the normal course of action is that HRM staff would look at all of those background studies and roll them up into a staff report with recommendations about what to do next here. And that would usually come to council for a decision. However, this area was selected as a special planning area, so the decision-making power of council was taken away by the province and has been given to the Task Force on Housing in HRM and the minister who oversees that. So it's my understanding that staff will still come and present to council, but the decision won't be made here. They'll also present to the task force, and the decision will be made there and signed off on by the Minister of Housing. And so a couple of years ago, the advocacy work of the coalition shifted from trying to work with councillors and staff to understand the advantages of keeping the area wild to focusing on the province. So over the last number of years, we've done advocacy and engagement that has looked like a lot of different things. Guided walks, craftivism, petitions, more than 1,000 people personally writing to the Premier and Minister Lohr to describe that instead of unsustainable housing development here, they would need more of a wilderness area kept intact. So we've met with different decision makers in government and politically, everything that we could possibly do to make the evidence-based decision here clear has been done and will continue. That has been a very brief overview of the Sandy Lake area, the coalition's work to make clear what our goal is for the area. I welcome your questions now, but also I work on this all of the time outside of ESSC, so I also welcome any questions or interactions about this anytime. And I invite you to go on a guided hike here with me in the summer if you haven't already done so. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Karen, for that presentation. Do we have any questions from the committee? I think I saw there's some movement there. Councillor Steele, you have the floor.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you for the presentation, Karen. Can you just say a bit more about some of the advocacy you're doing with the province? As you mentioned, it is a special planning area, and HRM's role is somewhat defined by the fact that it is a special planning area. So maybe help us understand what you're doing so perhaps we can align with your work.
Yeah, through the chair to councillors. So the special planning area move was a surprise a couple of years ago. It was imposed through provincial laws that were created. Something to know there is that, the work is with HRM staff, and HRM staff shared a number of ideas of places that could be accelerated as special planning areas that were at different stages in the development planning process. So staff presented 23 different areas that could have been accelerated, and 9 were selected by the province. There was never any rationale for why they were selected. So when it comes to special planning areas that the province would like a role in accelerating or being seen to accelerate, there are other options of other places that could be special planning areas. And the minister does have the power to add more special planning areas, which the minister did, and take places off of the special planning area list. And so part of the advocacy has been meeting with the then Minister of Housing, Minister Lohr, to talk about what the advantages would be of taking it off the special planning area list. Also, arguably, the special planning areas were set up to advance, I think they had a goal of 22,000 units in partnership with HRM, and in some ways of doing the math, they've already met that goal. So you could question whether the special planning areas and the task force still have work to do. Since then, they have decided to take on other work than just working with HRM. So they had a consultant's report done on what are the barriers to development as seen by developers, and then adopted that report and advanced some of those. But you could question whether they've reached their goal and whether they're working on the correct special planning areas. At the time, the coalition was clear that some of the special planning areas are fantastic and are in line with where we need to go. They're already on transit, they're redevelopment of existing sites. So some of the special planning areas are a great fit, and we're happy that they're being advanced. And this one happens to be a terrible fit for where we need to go as a city.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Morris.
Mr. Chair, and thank you, Karen, for your presentation. You mentioned the species at risk in the old growth forest at Sandy Lake, and can you tell us what, if any, provincial protections there are for those species at risk?
Yeah, through the chair to councillors, interesting question, and I get asked that all the time, or a version of that. Well, if there are endangered species there, doesn't that just draw a line in the sand and then no one can destroy it? And that is not how things are panning out for either this Federal Endangered Species Act, which is called SARA for short, or the Provincial Endangered Species Act. They each have different problems for why they don't just like stop things in their tracks. One of them is that species can be found and the area has not been called critical habitat or core habitat legally. So bulldozers can still come in and do everything except kill the animal, and then that's allowed under the law because that area wasn't declared critical habitat or core habitat. So if this area isn't critical habitat or core habitat for those endangered species, then you're only breaking the law if you like pick it up and strangle it. So very like narrow interpretation of the law. I've also seen a situation with a different community that I worked with where they had a community that had a whole bunch of wood turtles. So wood turtles are listed federally as threatened, and they're also listed provincially as threatened. So the protections under the law apply to them. So community provided, there was a housing development proposed in the community that was going to be right where the wood turtles live. And these are people who people have wood turtles going across their lawn and nesting on their driveway, and they have to shoo them off the road. Like there are wood turtles in this area. And they wrote to the provincial recovery team, who then declared that area critical habitat or core habitat for the species. And the staff person who was working through this at HRM was notified of all this. And in the end, they did still approve the development agreement right where the turtles are, because they said in development agreements, there's a clause that says the developer must follow all provincial and federal laws. And those aren't HRM laws, but we're like totally counting on you to follow those laws. So HRM found that it was, had clean hands legally. It doesn't need to enforce those laws. Another level of government does that. So it kind of got stuck between HRM saying we're not legally responsible for the turtles and the province saying there are definitely turtles there. So, and I would say it's not the only example in Canada of species at risk sort of falling through the legal jurisdiction cracks where no one quite comes to their aid and no one quite draws a line in the sand and says not here because it's one of the last remaining places on Earth for this species. So no. So even though there are 15 species at risk at Sandy Lake, it could be that no level of government is like, no, it's hard no, because they're here.
Okay, thank you. I'm sure it's complex, but I appreciate you boiling it down. So even it sounds like even if this were declared a critical habitat based on the old growth forest or some of the species there, it still wouldn't necessarily protect it from future development.
Yeah, it would be tricky. I will say, on the other hand, there have been some situations in Canada where the federal government has intervened with municipal processes because there was a species at risk right at a site that was being considered for development. So this happened in Quebec with a frog called Western Chorus frog, which confusingly is called Western Chorus frog, but it was in Quebec. But there were 2 remaining wetlands in Canada that still had this frog, and a Quebec municipality and a developer allowed development to start to happen there, and the federal government did intervene in that case. So, it could go either way. Often, species at risk are not protected under the very laws that are supposed to protect them, but there are some exceptional cases where there is an intervention where it's like the last place on earth for something.
Okay, and could you give us your assessment of what impact development would have on downstream flood risk areas if Sandy Lake were to be developed?
Yeah, the 30 groups are united under this vision for a couple reasons. One is that we feel like there really are threats to HRM's Sandy Lake Regional Park from the development where it's proposed and how developments usually turn out. So you can imagine an impact to lake water quality as we've seen in many lakes in HRM. I believe last month at this very committee, you saw a presentation by a newly formed group of wise people that when you put stormwater into streams that fill into lakes and lakes, you decrease their water quality and eventually becomes not just unswimmable for people, but very problematic for the species that are trying to live there. So we have no evidence in HRM or Dartmouth, Halifax or Dartmouth, to think that if you develop in the headwaters of the lake, it's going to go anywhere other than downhill for lake water quality, including impacting the HRM beach. So there's a risk to water quality from what happens in the headwaters and the development. Then you're asking about flooding downstream. I mean, the Sackville River can flood horrifically, as we saw in, I think it was June and July 2023. Basic science of watersheds is that the more you pave them over or clear them, then you're going to have water moving there more quickly. A piece of work that's been done by HRM is updated floodplain modeling on the Sackville River, which modeled part of the floodplain, but it didn't model all of the watershed. And one of the areas that was left out is the Sandy Lake subwatershed, which is the largest subwatershed of the Sackville River, largest subwatershed. So I commend you for doing difficult work on zoning a floodplain, which has restrictions on it, but the modeling did not include the entire watershed. So you don't have a full vision of what would be the impact if you converted a lot of the Sandy Lake subwatershed to harder surfaces. And you can speak with staff, which I did, about why they did that at that time, and that's a whole other presentation. But we don't have an evidence-based understanding of what would happen if you converted a bunch of the Sandy Lake subwatershed to harder surfaces. Some of that work might be being done under the background studies that HRM has commissioned right now, but I haven't seen the studies, so I don't know. I would hope that the public and council has some time to see the background studies and the staff report before any decisions are made, because that's a very potentially impactful decision.
So it would be a gap in our emergency planning and watershed planning for the Sackville River then?
Yeah, I mean, staff would be able to better speak to that. I don't know the full, suite of evidence in front of staff, but this isn't a small development, and it is in the headwaters of the lake, and it is in a subwatershed that wasn't considered in the most recent modeling for the Sackville River floodplain rezoning.
Okay, thank you.
Seeing no others, Karen, thanks very much. When you do your hike, please invite me. I'll come for sure, and I'm sure others will come around the table too. So thank you very much, Karen. Appreciate it. All right, our next and last presentation for our meeting today is 10.3.3. Jillian Ramsey, speaking of hiking, Hike the Greenbelt 2024. Jillian, welcome. Great. Do you have your slide deck ready?
Yes, I do.
Yeah, well, thank you very much for coming today and doing your presentation. You have 10 minutes, and we welcome your presentation.
Yes, thank you so much for having me, folks. I really appreciate it. So my name is Jillian Ramsey. I use she, her pronouns, and I am the recent sustainability or Sustainable Cities Coordinator for the Ecology Action Center. And I'm really looking forward to sharing a little bit about my work today. Specifically, I'd like to talk about the major campaign that I run, which is called Hike the Greenbelt, the impact that this campaign had in 2024, and what we're hearing from HRM residents about the campaign and the green spaces we operate in, as well as how the Green Network is going to benefit people and planet. So I'm sure you're all well familiar with the Ecology Action Center, but just for the sake of it, the EAC is a nonprofit organized to dedicate their time to building a healthier and more sustainable Mi'kma'ki or Nova Scotia. So a key part of our work that I think is really important to consider is we're able to act as a bridge between the public and policy and decision makers such as yourselves. So, we're able to ensure residents are informed about environmental decisions happening in the HRM and the rest of the province, while also amplifying resident voices in policy discussions where they might not have a seat at the table. So in my role specifically, I lead the Built Environment team, which is one of 7 action teams at the Ecology Action Center. A major bucket of my work is focusing on green belting. So this essentially means we are trying to protect essential wilderness corridors, curb urban sprawl, and help build complete communities, or you may hear them referred to as 15-minute cities. I also manage our HRM Alliance, which is a coalition of over 60 organizations advocating for greenbelt protection and the Green Network to be established in the HRM. These are active leaders in their communities, so they're a very great group of people who are working on this. And I also run Hike the Greenbelt, as I mentioned, which is an initiative that is helping connect people to nature and raising awareness about our local environments and challenges that they're facing. And the common thread that really ties my bodies of work together is the Halifax Green Network Plan. So a short overview of the Halifax Green Network Plan. It's a municipal framework that is designed to protect our natural areas, connect green spaces and ecological corridors, enhance our municipality's climate resilience, support sustainable recreation, guide our future development, protect our water resources, and foster community engagement and stewardship opportunities for our residents. It is one of the HRM's priority plans, as I'm sure you all know. And our HRM Alliance, as well as the EAC, did help develop it. And it was voted in unanimously in 2018, even by some people on this committee as well, which is pretty cool. So despite it being a really great plan and a priority plan for the HRM, it does lack a lot of funding and support that we're seeing other priority plans receive. Specifically, I'm thinking of Halifax, where it being another sustainability plan, perhaps sometimes they get lumped in together. But it's important to note that Halifax was developed independently and with the HGNP in mind. So the HGNP goals being satisfied will not necessarily happen if Halifax is satisfied. So it does require distinct attention and action from council, as well as publicity and understanding for residents what the impact of having an HGNP implemented would mean for them. And so a way that I'm able to help raise this awareness for folks is with Hike the Greenbelt. So as I mentioned, this is a campaign that is designed to help people connect with and understand the value of the HRM's wild spaces. We're really looking to showcase the high quality, biodiverse, natural green space that we have in our municipality. What we have here in the HRM is really rare, and I can't stress that enough. You can drive or bus 20 minutes outside of the downtown core from this building in almost any direction and find real, authentic, high quality, high functioning ecological spaces. You are going to be hard pressed to find that anywhere else in the world. And this is something that our municipality's residents really value about living here. So it's a huge attraction for folks to stay, to move here like myself, or to visit our amazing city. So we do a lot of this work through guided hikes and events. We want to stress to people that these environmental areas have high value. The green spaces we're looking to protect aren't your average forests. They are each hosting unique features, rare and endangered species, and provide incredible ecological functions as well. There's a lot of social benefits, recreation, and community access. There's an economic impact. So any stressors or impacts to these green spaces would also possibly be associated with increased costs in climate-related disasters. A lot of these high-functioning ecospaces help prevent flooding and act as fire breaks as well. And then, of course, we talk about the health benefits, how they're improving water and air quality, and acting as the lungs of our urban core. And then looking at how development would potentially impact these areas as well is something that we focus on. So we were able to survey our residents in 2024, which was the first year we surveyed people in the Hike the Greenbelt campaign. We had over 200 people join us to hike in the summer and fall over the span of 14 events. These events took place in 3 major areas. So there's the Halifax Backlands, which is in the Spryfield and Purcell's Cove area, Blue Mountain Birch Cove Lakes Wilderness area, which is in Tantallon and many surrounding areas. It's pretty big. And then we've, of course, got Sandy Lake, which I won't dive into because you just heard from Karen. We received some really wonderful feedback and stats from folks as well. So 42% of the people that participated in our events, this was their first time coming to any of these spaces. And a lot of that was because of the accessibility of it. I'm sure many of you have been to one or all of these parks before, and it's definitely challenging to navigate if you are not an expert in spending time in unmanaged wild spaces. So it was really great that we were able to provide that access for folks. 96% of participants also felt that their knowledge of our native ecology and development pressures had improved after attending this event, which is really excellent. And then 94% of participants felt that they were more confident in their ability to take action after this event as well. So it's really great because people want to act and advocate for these spaces, but they don't necessarily have the tools to do it. So we're able to provide people a way to be more engaged in what's happening in our HRM. So Hike the Greenbelt obviously aligns with the Halifax Green Network Plan. So the HGNP outlines 79 actions which require implementation through programs like what I'm running and Karen and other folks run as well, and bylaws, which you folks are able to help with there. So the EAC has been tracking the progress of these actions since the implementation or the adoption of the Halifax Green Network Plan. And there are particularly 33 items that we feel need to be incorporated into the regional plan. There is a document that outlines all of this, which I can share with you folks at a later date. And so we are working to actively support the HGNP's goals by educating residents on local ecology, attaining feedback from them so that we can then act as a bridge and share it with you folks, educate people through conversations about sustainable development, and essentially just advocate for the protection of natural space. And we received really potent feedback from people. People were really excited about these programs. So we distilled everything that they said into kind of 5 major themes of what we were seeing. People were appreciative of having an increased ecological awareness. They appreciated learning about what makes these areas distinct and significant and biodiverse. They also felt empowered to act environmentally. They felt better equipped and more willing to advocate for Greenbelt issues that they had little knowledge of originally before coming on these hikes. And they appreciated an opportunity to ask questions and learn about effective individual action. People felt more connected to nature, which is really great because it helps people foster a connection with our local spaces. And there's also a lot of evidence to support the fact that folks who feel connected to nature are more likely to act environmentally in other places as well. Finally, people were really grateful for access to community-based recreation. So again, that accessibility piece was really coming up a lot for people, and the community connection piece. And the fact that there were knowledgeable leadership and programs available for people to access these spaces so that they could connect a little bit more deeply and be more engaged in what's happening in our parks. So ultimately, all 200 people that joined us this summer, 200 plus, the Ecology Action Center, our HRM Alliance, and you lovely folks are all working towards the same goal, which is we want a greener HRM, right? And so it's really important that we remember the Halifax Green Network that we have is truly irreplaceable. Accessible wild green space that supports native wildlife this close to an urban core is really, really hard to find anywhere else. Vital ecosystem services are being performed, like air and water purification, carbon storage, and flood and fire breaks all in our urban center. And there are exceptional recreation opportunities as well that are highly valued by our residents and can also be a potential tourism asset. So we are asking that you, as members of the council, incorporate the Halifax Green Network Plan into the regional plan and ensure that it receives the funding and attention that it deserves as a priority plan. So we are hoping that when votes come to the table about decisions that affect our green spaces, you are keeping in mind the goals that we're all working towards in the Halifax Green Network Plan. So thank you so much for your time today. I really appreciate you listening to me, and I welcome any questions you might have.
Jillian, thank you very much for the presentation. Any questions from the committee? Councillor White.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor. Nice to see you, Jillian. It may be a staff question. I don't think we have staff here, but I get confused when I hear that we have a priority plan and we have a regional plan that's super important, yet we're not getting our priority plan into our regional plan. That's what I'm hearing from you, that there's 33 actions in there in one of our priority plans that is not in the regional plan. I don't know if you can provide any more clarity on that, or
I think our Director of Planning is more than happy to jump in.
Thank you.
Yes, thank you, Deputy Mayor Jacqueline Hamilton, Executive Director of Planning and Development for the municipality. And certainly I can clarify for Councillor White that the Green Network Plan is certainly called for in our regional plan. So there is a strong connection there. We are actively, you'll notice in our business plan for the upcoming year, we will be presenting a progress report to Regional Council on the progress of the Green Network Plan and how we are tracking. And I know we have our program manager for the Green Network Plan, David Hodd, here in the audience today. So he's actively working with community stakeholders and other partners to advance the work of the Green Network Plan. So there'll be more to come on that. And certainly Council will be also considering your phase 4 of the regional plan very soon in late spring and early summer timeframe.
So is it just kind of a case that we're working on it, but it's not public yet, or is what Jillian's saying not being addressed? It is being addressed when I hear it from you.
Yeah, well, certainly I can't speak. We welcome an opportunity to have a further conversation with the presenter and understand the 33 recommendations. I haven't seen those personally, so I can't speak to those, but happy to have a follow-up discussion on those and how they may be considered in the regional planning process. And that is a public process that will be coming to council, and members of the public will have an opportunity to engage with council on that process as well.
Okay, fantastic. Do I have more time? Or? I'm curious. I lived in Toronto for a while before I came home, and we had the green belt there. Is there any? Is this our green belt? Is there legislation locally in Nova Scotia to have that sort of green belt here?
Yeah, great question. So also from Toronto. So yeah, familiar with the benefits of having a green belt from my personal life. We are hoping that the Green Network Plan would create a sort of green belt in Halifax. I mean, Green Network, Green Belt, it can kind of be synonymous. It's really just coming down to semantics at that point. But essentially what we're looking for is established green belt legislation and laws and bylaws that are actively working to protect those spaces. So, we have a lot of green spaces that are being encroached upon by development right now. Specifically, the 3 areas that I mentioned are our priorities, and they're outlined in the Halifax Green Network Plan as well. So any sort of policies and decisions that are being made around how we're managing where to build and where not to build for community and for people is something that we really want to see implemented. So just making sure that that plan, the Halifax Green Network Plan, that outlines really strong action steps, actions, objectives that can benefit the protection of these areas. We want to see those implemented in the regional plan.
Thank you. Thanks.
Thank you, Councillor White. Very good questions. I'm wondering, before I turn it over to Councillor Morris, Jacqueline, since we have so many new councillors around the table, I'm not sure how many of the newer councillors are really understanding the Green Network Plan, and I'm wondering before it comes to council, will there be an opportunity maybe to do some education around that, just to understand, before we discuss it at council, to understand the plan and its history and where it is now and where it's going to go before it comes to council.
Yes, Deputy Mayor. The intention is to bring the progress report. My understanding is that it's within the mandate of the Community Planning and Economic Development Standing Committee, and so we would be coming up through the committee with that progress report in due course, and certainly happy to have any conversations one-on-one with any of the new councillors around just explaining some of the background and context for that.
I see some noddings from my colleagues. Maybe that's something we can take offline to make sure it happens. Thank you. Councillor Morris.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Jillian, for the presentation. I'm just wondering if you could say a little bit more about just high level what you envision the Greenbelt legislation might do, either based on your experience in Toronto or your pending recommendations here. One of the challenges we have in Nova Scotia, we have a high level of private ownership of land for historic reasons and that sort of thing. So we don't have large tracts of land that are publicly owned. So I guess I'm wondering how this might work, if you envision zoning as sort of addressing some of the issues, or how we might make this real here in Halifax.
Thank you for that question. I think it's really important to adhere to what the Green Network Plan is saying to make things happen. So the plan itself outlines 16 objectives and 79 actions that, if followed, we will see a very healthy and established green network or green belt in the HRM. So, making sure we're prioritizing ecological connectivity and wildlife corridors. We are working towards, building our communities with access to these green spaces in mind, so that, there's all of those great recreation and health benefits. I think that our first step, and David Hod and I have met about this before, and so he'll be presenting to CPED next month. So I recommend folks, if you're available, you should definitely go check that out. I know I will. An update on the HGNP and where we're at. It sounds like what needs to happen is we need to actually start solidifying these actions in this plan to make sure that our desired outcome of protecting and expanding natural green spaces can get carried out. So, there's a little bit of vague language in the HGNP, consider this, or let's think about doing something to an undisclosed time and date. So we need some more accountability measures, and I know David will be able to speak to that better in CPED.
Great, thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Seeing no others on the board, thank you for the presentation. Extremely important conversation to have, by all means. It was interesting. I saw your 14 events last year, and even though there was a lot of good learning, as you mentioned in that presentation, you are talking about like-minded people going to those events, right? So the big question is, how do we get them, not that the people are necessarily opposed to the right word, but that are neutral to it, right? And some of those neutral folks are decision makers, right? And so, it'd be nice to be able to get similar kind of activity that invites all, but full court press on the folks that are in that neutral category. So I think there's where the real opportunity to educate is. So anyway, just a comment. So thank you very much for your presentation. Really appreciate the work that you do and all the folks at Ecology Action Centre. So that's our final presentation of the day. Next, we have an opportunity for the public to participate, to come up and speak to the committee. Is there anybody that would like to speak? Well, we have, yes, ma'am, please come forward. You can choose whatever seat you like, and we'll get you to introduce yourself. And if you're representing an organization, it's great. You're going to have 5 minutes, and our lovely municipal clerk will give you a heads up when your time is almost up. So welcome and to the committee.
Great. Thank you very much, Deputy Mayor and councillors, for letting me speak. My name is Melanie Jones, and I'm found out about this at the last minute, so I'm not terribly well prepared, so I apologize if I'm all over the place. But first I'll speak to the Sandy Lake, because I've hiked and snowshoed extensively out there, And I think it's very important, actually vitally important, for that area to be extended and protected. I've found fungus out there that I've not found anywhere else in all my hiking and decades of hiking all over New England and Eastern Canada and whatnot. So I'll leave that one. That one is a priceless piece of property and should be protected. The main thing I wanted to speak about is fluoridation. And I'm actually quite saddened to hear the biases that went on, because there is another side to the story. There are risks to fluoride, and a letter, I just found out about this letter, so that has been sent to all of you, and I hope you read it and go through those resources. So fluoride is not 100% safe by any means, and there are a lot of neurological risks. So I will give you a personal anecdotal story. So with my children, we'd go to the dentist, they'd have their checkups, and with one of them, I noticed when very early on, she'd have the fluoride treatment. She'd come out of the dentist's office, another one of my kids would go in, and she would just be absolutely squirrely, running around like a madman. And then she would get really agitated. And then we'd go home, and sometimes she would get sick. But then she'd also go into kind of an exhaustive state where she was just, her body was just done. So that happened a few times. And I realized that fluoride treatment was doing that to her. She could not handle that. And not only could she not handle fluoride, but she also couldn't handle chlorine in swimming pools. So she would get sick, like appendicitis type attacks from these chemicals. So she was sensitive to this group of chemicals. So we could not use fluoride treatments on her. We could not use fluoridated toothpaste on her. We would have to buy bottled water in glass bottles, so Sparkling Springs, so, that was a great expense to my family to have to provide that for my daughter. So I argue the costs as well for providing fluoride into the system. The logic of treating everybody for the benefit of the few, because they quite frankly, went on about how it is the underprivileged, the disadvantaged, who have the most serious problems with dental decay. And yes, that is true. So why are we fluoridating everybody when we all already get it naturally in the water? That's overkill. So it's better to address the societal issues on the other side of things rather than putting fluoride blanketly into the water when you have neurological damage going on with children. So I noticed it in mine, but how many others have not noticed it in their children? Two of my daughters are teachers in schools, and I can tell you it is a nightmare in the schools with the neurological issues that are going on, from autism, ADD, ADHD, Tourette's, you name it. How many of these children are suffering from fluoride and their parents don't know it? And these kids are going into school and wreaking havoc within the classroom. We really need to dig down into the science on this, because there is a whole other side. They have quite a bit of bias from their backgrounds. The CDC in the US has looked at 55 studies, and of those 52, they found it was consistent that fluoridation in the water lowers the IQ. So, this is the CDC, and this is on record. So when they talked about studies, well, what studies were they looking at in Health Canada, right? When you have the CDC saying something very different. Also, the Calgary study, what other factors did they look at besides fluoridation? Nothing. So that's not an accurate study. There are many issues here to dig through. And I think, the due diligence here is to dig far deeper than to just trust as, oh, okay, 30 seconds, all right. I'll stop there and let anybody who wants to ask me questions, fire away.
Thank you very much, Ms. Jones, for taking the time to speak to us today. I'm not seeing any questions from the floor, but thank you very much. Truly appreciate it. I'll ask if anyone else wishes to speak. And I'll ask one more time if anybody else wishes to speak. And so, seeing no others, we'll move on to close the rest of the meeting. There's no information reports or motions or nothing in camera, no added items. Are there any notice of motions? The next scheduled date is May 1st, 2025. I have someone call for adjournment. Thanks very much. And thank you to everybody. I appreciate the day. Enjoy the day. And I don't know if the Mother Nature has arrived on us yet, but hopefully it's not too bad. Thanks very much, everyone.